So kind of what I'm going to do is walk through a lot of the things that Excel does. And the point isn't necessarily for you to leave knowing how to do all of those things, but for you to know all the different types of things that Excel is able to do and to how to figure out how to do them on your own. So we're going to kind of start out really, really basic, because when I did this last time, I found out there's a wide variety of what people know about Excel, and so so some of you might start off a little bit slower than you would like it to, but just bear with me. And if you all open up the workbook that I sent around, if you didn't get it, then just have someone next to you email it to you. So before getting started, a few things about Excel. The first is it looks a little bit different on Mac and PC. Those of you who are using a Mac may notice that your screen looks different than mine. It's kind of annoying, but it's just kind of the way that it is. I prefer using the PC version to the Mac version because it's a Windows product, and I think it works a little better in the OS that they designed, but other people disagree, other people like Macs. So there's a few things to note. One is that if you want to use a computer with 2 monitors, you can do that in the Roche library on the 2nd floor of the GIS lab. Whenever I have like a big thing that needs like a few workbooks, I go up there because I have like one workbook there and one workbook there. I think it's kind of cool. And just a note about file types. There's a few different types of Excel files. There's an XLS file is kind of the standard. But then in 2007, they kind of reworked the system, and so the XLSX file is like the newer version of Excel, and it's back compatible, but sometimes we'll run into problems because we're trying to do something in an older version of Excel that you could do in the newer version of Excel, it won't work out. That's mostly just a problem when you're trying to like import a workbook into like GIS or SAS or something like that was built in the old version and doesn't know what to do for the new version. You just be aware of why those things might happen. The best way to learn Excel is to look at other workbooks that people have made and like figure out how they figured out how to do things, and that's kind of how I learned everything. And then you just Google whatever problem you have. There's no real like structured course in Excel that you can take, but just like kind of figure things out as you go. And here's a list of hotkeys that are pretty handy for both PC and Mac. And these are the 4 that I use all the time. Locking formulas, opening the format bar, and then refreshing or calculating the active or full sheets. Yes?
If we're using, for instance, the VM virtual machine, where we're using the Windows on our Mac, then are we doing the hotkeys for the PC?
That's an excellent question. You'll have to let me know.
I'll just start with it right now. Cool.
Cool. And so I'm trying to have the commands in both Mac and PC, but I know PC a lot better. So if you're on a Mac and something doesn't work, I may not know how to fix it for you, but we'll hope that doesn't happen. So first, let's go through the menus. You may notice, those of you that, or how many of you are used to like an older version of Excel that doesn't have these ribbon things up top, that has like the file bars up top? We got 1, 2, 3. Okay. So it's basically just a fancier like drop file system, but it just kind of takes a minute to get used to where everything is. I'm not going to go through where all these things are, but these are like the 15 most useful things to do in Excel, and that's like where they're located in Mac and PC. And we're going to go through most of these through the course of this thing. This I found out to add last year because people didn't know how to navigate Excel workbooks, so I'm just going to go over this real fast. So if you want to move around in Excel, then the arrows obviously, but also hitting return will bring you down, and tab will bring you across, which is useful if you're entering data really fast. To move to the end of the data regions, if you hold down Control and hit the arrow, then you'll kind of like zoom to the end of this text box, and if you hold down Shift while you do that, then it'll highlight it as you go. And then you can page down, page up, obviously. You can scroll through the worksheets by holding down Control and hitting page up and page down. If you have another Excel file open, you can scroll through those. And if you highlight a whole bunch and press delete, then you will delete all of your cells. So just keep that in mind. Formatting cells. If you either right-click on anything and go to Format Cells, or hit either Control or Command 1, then you'll get this little formatting thing up here. Generally, it's a good idea to make things look nice. I have like my color system that I like to use, obviously. But if you're ever doing something you're going to hand in, then making it look good is always a good thing. So make it look like a table. So actual things to do in Excel. The first one I'll go over is wrapping and merging. So wrapping is merging is when you merge multiple cells together, and wrapping is when you wrap text around in a cell. So this is the same thing that's been wrapped or merged, so it's the same text. So we highlight this here and we go up here, it's in the home, and we merge it. Then all those 4 cells will merge together into one big cell. We can undo that, and we can also wrap it so that it'll wrap around and show the entire text. And that's just useful when you're trying to make like a table for a presentation, or something that it actually matters how it looks on the spreadsheet. That's how to make it a little bit more presentable. Pasting. So there's kind of 3 pieces of information in any Excel cell. There's both the value that's being displayed in the cell, there's the formula that's creating that value, and then there's the format that's determining how it looks. And so when you paste cells, depending on what you're trying to do, you might be trying to bring over one or multiple parts of that cell's information. So for example, you could just paste a copy, paste a cell, you could paste value, paste format, or paste formula. So down here, I'll do all of these with this little red bolded 6. If you look in the formula bar here, you'll see the 6 is actually a formula called 1 plus 2 plus 3. So if we were just to copy it and paste it, it comes out as 1 plus 2 plus 3. If we were to go to paste values, oh god, this is new. Paste B, then it will just be the 6 that comes through, and then the formatting, and we lose the formula up there. And then we go to paste formula. Then the formula still comes through and we lose the formatting. And if we go to paste formats, which is actually, you have to go to special and then select format, then nothing gets pasted over. But then if you type something, then it's bold and red, because it's copied over the bold redness of the 6, but not the 6 or the formula behind the 6. So just keep in mind that depending on what you're doing, you might want one or all of those things available. Filtering and sorting data. So that is located in the data tab. And this is when you have a long column of data and you want to make a little bit more sense out of it. So the first thing that you can do, so this is just the population of some of the largest cities in the world. And instead of scrolling down through all of this, if I want to say find what all the cities in China are, then I can click this filter button up in the data ribbon, and that creates these filters, and I'm sure you've seen things like this. If I can just select China and see what all of the cities in China, their population is. And the cells didn't actually go away, because you can see like here's row 23, here's row 26. It's just all of the cells that were not China are hidden from view. And then you can also select any one of these, you can filter on multiple things, and to get rid of it, you can just hit clear or the filter button to get rid of the filters. You can also sort the data, where this is kind of the same like general sense of data range that I was talking about when I was holding down control. It goes to the end of like where that chunk of data is. And if you go to sorts, then it'll like sort the entire table that you're attaching to. And that's pretty straightforward. But then one other thing that you can do is if you want to scroll down, but you want to preserve the column headings that you're looking at, then you can highlight a row of data, and you can go to freeze panes, and then you can scroll down, and you're preserving the column headers, you're preserving everything above that freeze pane system. So it's good if you're going down a whole bunch of data, and you want to see what's back at the top. Text and numeric data is something that a lot of people kind of run into when they enter in a number in Excel, and Excel can't figure out that it's a number. And this is because, like a lot of software programs, Excel treats numeric and string data differently. And it's not a matter of formatting it as one or the other, it's actually reading it either as a text or as a string of letters. And so if you're bringing in numbers, if you paste them from the internet or something like that, and sometimes they're not showing those numbers, you need to change them around a bit to make them work. So for example, here's a 2000 that's entered as text. And you can see that the little formula here will say whether it's being treated as a number or not. So there's 3 ways to turn this from a number into text. The easiest way is to just highlight it in the formula bar and press enter, and then you see the number is named to be true. So if you just have like 1 or 2 things and you just highlight it in formula, you just hit enter, and it'll kind of force Excel to like reset itself and think about whether it looks like a number or not. If you have a long list of these things, like say that you brought in like a list of like 50 states and some value associated with them, and it would be kind of like time consuming to go through and highlight each one. But then the next thing you can do is you can basically treat it as a number in an equation. So if I take this 2000, which again is being treated as a text, and I, in a separate cell, create a formula that says like that plus 0, then Excel will again kind of like rethink about it, recognize that it's a number, and treat it as a number. So for example here, I have this one's treated as a text plus 0, and Excel will recognize that as a number. And one kind of easy way to see if Excel is treating something as a number or as text is to see if it's being aligned on the left side or the right side of the cell. If it's on the right side of the cell, then it's a number. If it's on the left side, then it's text, unless you force it to align itself a little differently. The third way to do it is if you have a whole big table of data, and it would be too time consuming to either even go through and like do the plus 0 thing, then you can find and replace. So if I search for all the zeros in this workbook, and I replace them with zeros, then it's kind of rejiggered everything that had a 0 in it and recognized that those are in fact numbers. And so if you had like a couple thousand data points, and you could do that with numbers 0 through 9 and get them all back into numeric data.
So could you repeat that?
Yeah, so if I go through and I find every 0 on this page, and I replace it with a 0, so it's going to like find the zeros in here, and it's going to replace them all with zeros. And in doing so, will effectively do the same thing as like highlighting it in the formula bar and pressing enter. Like it'll force Excel to like rethink that number. So like look at these falses here, the ones that it's saying are text. So when I hit replace all, then now they're saying true because Excel has like recalculated itself or whatever. It's just a little workaround. But be careful when you do that, you're actually replacing zeros with zeros and not zeros with ones, because that's a great way to mess up all of your data. So only do that if you have like a big giant thing to be the absolute the other way.
Then do you take the zeros out?
No, because I didn't actually get rid of any. So like I would do replace 0 with 0 and replace all. And then I would do like replace 1 with 1 and replace all. And so I kind of go through that way. So I'm not like it's keeping the same number there.
You
It's
do a
just
for each number, I see.
right. You can also change numeric data to text if you ever need to. And the way that you do that, there's kind of an easy way and a hard way again. The easy way is to put an apostrophe before the number. So for example, here's the number 1, 2, 3, and it's saying that it's a number. And if I put an apostrophe before there, then the apostrophe doesn't show up in the text bar, but it knows that I'm indicating that it's a text variable, or a text cell record. The other thing that you can do is there's a function for text. So like here's a 1, 2, 3, and it's being treated as a number. And then here's a formula that's saying read what's in cell J22 as text. And there's a few different ways that you can format it. This is something that you probably don't need to know as much as getting the numeric data or text data into numeric data. But every now and again it comes in handy. You can make the text data show up whichever way we want, depending on how you format this little 0 sign. So if you guys want to like in your Excel workbook, you can like look and think, if I were to make these things into numbers, then I would do equals this plus 0. And if I had a full column of this, I could just copy this formula down. And now all of these texts are numbers, and then once bring them back to text, and I would just do text, highlight this, give it a format, and now it's text again. So that's just how you work with number and dates, or number and text formats. So dates are the next thing. They're kind of cool in Excel in that every date is actually, every day is a number. Excel has assigned a number to every date since January 1st, 1900. So if I enter the number 10, so this is both the number 10 and it also happens to be January 10th, 1900. So if I go to the format bar and I format it as a date, then it's coming through as that date. So if I put in date number 40,000, then it's saying July 6th, 2009. And this, you can also do it with time. So if I were to go to format this as, a date and time, then I can put a decimal in there, so 40,000.12, and it's coming out as July 6, 2009 at 2:52 in the morning. So the entire spectrum of numbers from 1900 to today, many years into the future, is represented as a number in Excel. If you ever need to use numbers before 1900, you're kind of out of luck. You'll have to look up this Excel 1904 calendar, but don't do that unless you need to. So this is both a really cool thing, because then you can use a date in a formula, which I'll show you in a second, but it's also a little annoying sometimes if you're ever entering data about the convenience stores and you're trying to talk to like 7-Eleven, then 7-Eleven comes in as July 11th, which is kind of aggravating. In which case you would use that little apostrophe thing. So 7-Eleven is now 7-Eleven. And the way that you use this in the formula, so you say you have this March 15th, 1987, which happens to be my birthday. If you want to know the previous day, you can just do equals that minus 1 is March 14th, that minus 7, or that minus 365. Oops. Whatever, you get the picture. And so you can see that if you're doing some sort of thing that required to, if you had a workbook and you wanted to know what the story of this particular thing was a week before, you can just work that into a formula. The other thing about numeric and text numbers, or about number types, is the true false. If you set up like a mathematical operation, then sometimes it'll be returned as a true or false. So if I type in equals 1, then I'm asking Excel the question, does 1 equal 1? And if I hit enter, it tells me true, because 1 does equal 1. It would tell me false if I gave it some equation that didn't make sense. And the thing is that even though it looks like text, it's actually a number, where a true is 1 and a false is 0. And the way that you get it to look like a number is the same way that you get text data to look like number data. You just add 0 to it. So if I add 0 to that true, it shows up as 1. You can also multiply by 1 or do anything else that would not change the number, but make it rethink of itself as a number. And so this comes in, I'll do an example when we build a few things more onto this of how you'd actually use this in a formula. But you can imagine that having this sort of operation binary thing would come in handy in a few things. So that's the number types. And now we'll talk about functions. And are there any questions on anything I've done so far? Are you guys good? Is this all stuff that you're bored about, or?
Most of it's new.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
Good to hear that.
Yeah, for me anyway.
For the dates in the number section, how do you get to show just a number value? Like, do you have to type in a function?
You mean how do you get the date to show just a number?
Yeah, so for example, you have January 1st, 1900, that equals 1.
Right.
But how do you get from one to the other?
So that would be in the format bar.
Oh, okay.
So the format, so you can't use the format bar to change from Excel reading it as text to reading it as a number. But you can change it if it is a number, how it displays that number.
Oh,
So like right now this is displayed in some date time format, but if I go up here and say display it in general format, then it's back to that number that I already had.
Okay.
And yeah, feel free to shout out questions as we go because it's a pretty small group, so yes.
How does that apostrophe work again? I just tried to do it.
Right. So if I'm typing in a number and I type in an apostrophe and then a bunch of numbers, and I hit enter, then that's being treated as a text.
Wait, so then how would you, so like for the date one under the exercise, how did you change it to be the previous day and previous week?
Right. So that is, so you can substitute a cell for a value in an equation. So what I'm doing here is I'm basically saying equals the value of March 15th, 1987 minus 1. But instead of typing in the value of March 15th, 1987, I'm just highlighting this cell that I've used before. And so what it's doing is it's finding the value within that formula and subtracting one from it.
Got it.
And yeah, I guess to go over that a bit more about how to reference cells is, so let's say that I've had a few here, so I had 1, 2, and 3, and I want to add those 3 cells up. Then I can either add up equals 1 plus 2 plus 3, or I can reference these cells where I'm doing that cell plus that cell plus that cell. And so if you look up here in the formula bar, then you're seeing that it's actually representing those cells. And it's also color-coded, so I know which cell is which one in the formula bar. And we'll talk a bit more about that in a So functions. So functions are kind of the heart and soul of what Excel does. All the really cool stuff is in some way a function. And what it really is, it's a predefined formula of like a set of operations that it will do to the numbers that you put into it. And we'll get into an example in a minute, but just to show you kind of what the syntax looks like. So VLOOKUP, which is one of like the big standard formulas in Excel we'll talk about soon. I type in the name of the formula, and then I open up a parentheses, and it gives me these terms to enter. So for the VLOOKUP formula, it needs a lookup value, a table array, a column index number, and then this one here is range lookup because it's in brackets, that means that's optional. So if I were to do a VLOOKUP, then I would say like equals red, and then I would highlight a few cells, and don't worry about how what this means, we'll talk about it in a minute. But so these are the terms that I would enter into this formula. And so the lookup value that I'm entering is red. The table array are these cells that I've selected. The column index number is 3 and the range lookup is 0. And what Excel is doing is it's taking those inputs into it and plugging it into that formula that it knows that what VLOOKUP is, and then it's going to spit out a result. It won't, if I press enter, it wouldn't work because that's not actual real data, but that's how a formula works.
But what would you be doing if you were to, what is the red you're looking up? Is that looking up the words red within those
Right,
cells?
and so
highlighted?
I'll show you what VLOOKUP is in a second. I just want to use this one as an example because it includes a number of different column fields. So the thing to get right now is just what the syntax is. So there's the parentheses open and close the function. So everything within these parentheses is what I'm entering into this formula. The commas separate the different terms of the function. For example, lookup value and table array, two of the terms I need to enter into this function are separated by a comma. If I'm entering a range, such as this one here, then a colon it designates how big that range is. It's always a square, so it's the upper left and the lower right corner of the range. If there's quotes, then it means that I'm looking at text data. So for example, in any form I want to look up the word red or use anything with text in a form, I have to put it in quotes. If I were using the number 1, if I were using numeric data, then I wouldn't use quotes, I would just use 1. If there's for some reason I wanted to use 1 as a text, in the text form instead of the numeric form, I would put that 1 in quotes. And then if you were ever to link to another workbook or something like that, and there are brackets, like for also a new workbook, and reference a cell in it. Then so what it's doing here is the brackets are indicating the workbook that I'm linking to, and then this exclamation point is marking the end of the sheet that I'm looking to. And that's just kind of how the syntax works. That's something that you'll just get used to as you start doing stuff. So as far as finding formulas and information about them, in the formulas ribbon, then there's a function library. So if you choose these categories, there's all these different types of formulas. And if you choose on one of them, then it'll help you to actually like build so if we do this column one, then it'll bring me into like a function builder, and it'll tell me all the terms I need to put into that particular formula, and then like help me build it. It's better to not use this as you learn how to use the different functions, but this is an easy way to start if you're trying to find a particular thing. So for example, the VLOOKUP one I was just showing you, then it's the same columns I was entering by hand. I could instead enter them here. And it would spit out the same type of formula. So let's start with the kind of the most basic descriptive formulas out there, like sum, average, median, and product. So here's a range of data that I just put in there. And so we're going to use these different functions to tell us stuff about this data. So for example, the sum function, it does what you think it would do. It just sums up everything that's inside these formulas. So I sum 1, 3, 7, 15, 20, gives you that number. Average, median, product, they all do the same thing. Those are the basic descriptive ones. If you're summing data, there's a few ways to do it. You can either sum it by doing the sum function and then capturing all of the cells you want to sum within that function. You could actually type in, like, reference these cells like J25 plus J26 plus J27. They both come out to do the same thing, just depending on what you want to do and what you're using for it, they can both do it. Count functions are another handy thing. there's 3 that you should know. One is count, one is count A, and one is count blank. Kind of annoyingly, the count function, well, I guess I'll start with the count A function. It tells you how many cells are in an area that you're highlighting. So for example, if I took these cells over here, these green ones, and I did count A, and I highlighted all of these, then it's going to tell me that there are, I guess that's a bad example, but okay, let's do it this way. Let me count first. So count tells us all the rows and or all the cells in a range of cells that are a number, and so that spits out 6. So, no, sorry, it's count spits out 4 because in this range of 7 cells, 4 of those 7 cells are numbered, and so it's identifying the number that are numbers. If I were to count A instead, it's not going to tell me the number of cells overall. It's going to tell me the number of cells that have a value in them. So if there's a blank cell, it's not going to count the blank cell. So there's 6. And if I were to do count blank, then it's going to count all the ones that are blank. So it's going to give me a 1. And so the way that you would use this, so here's another range of data. So if I want to know how many cells are in this data, I would do count A. It would tell me that there are 12 cells. And if I want to know how many of those are numbers, then I would do counts, and so there'd be 6. And so that's another sort of like basic descriptive that Excel will do. Another one of like these are kind of the building block functions that like a lot of the other ones are built upon. And another one of those is if. And if you've ever done any sort of like math or programming or like database work, this will probably be familiar to similar principle in a lot of things. But it just tells you if a certain, like it says, it's a decision tree function. So you give it an operation similar to like the equals 1 equals 1. You tell it what to do if that decision tree function is correct and what to do if it's not correct. So for example, if we do if 7 is greater than 5, so that's our that's our operation, our logical test as it's called here. Then we tell it what to do if it's true. So we'll say A. And then we say what to do if it's not true. So we say B. And so since 7 is greater than 5, it's returning A. And then we're to copy this formula down and apply it to these cells as well. So that's referencing this 3 and 4 instead of the 7 and 5. Then it's going to say that B is greater in this row and that A is greater in this row. So that's an example of how you use the function and of how you copy that function and apply it to new rows of data or new instances of data in the same range.
Sorry, can you just show us how you copied it down?
Yeah. So if I have this one here,
Yeah.
then all I do is I highlight the cells I want it to copy to, and I kind of paste them.
Oh.
And so this is so the paste thing that I had talked about before, where there's 3 pieces of information. There's the formula, the value, and the format. So by default, if you just press Control P, then it copies all 3 pieces of those information.
Okay.
So when I copied this down to here, then it's bringing in with a formula as well. The formula, and this is something we'll get to in a minute, formulas in Excel are relative, which means that, well, you can change it to be not relative, but so when it's referencing R9 and S9, these 2 cells over here, it's not actually referencing R9 and S9, it's just knowing that it's referencing the cell 3 to the left of it and the cell 2 to the left of it.
Oh.
And so then when I copy it down to a new cell, then that cell is looking for the cell 3 and 2 to the left of that one. And so an example of how we would use this is if we have Larry and Magic there playing basketball, and we want to know which one is winning more games. So we'll do if Larry's number is greater than Magic's number, then we'll reference Larry. And if not, then we'll reference Magic. And these number signs I'll explain in a minute, but it's basically logging it, or logging that reference, so to make it not relative. And then so if I copy this row down, then it's telling me who has more points in each of those rows. And then I can go down to the bottom and find out how many Larrys there are in this list with the count function. So if I'll talk about that one there because that's actually a counted function. But one other thing about ifs is that you can kind of nest the if statements. So this one up here that we talked about is just one if, but then this term here, this A, could in turn be another formula. So let's look at this example here. So I want to know, okay, so if this number attached to A is greater than this number attached to B, then I want it to reference A. And if it's not greater than B, so this is the part of it where I'm assigning a value if that operation is false, then I'm going to open up another if statement. So then I'm saying if the value attached to B is greater than the value attached to C, then I want it to say B, and if not, I want it to say C. And I'll close both of the parentheses loops. And so now it's coming out C, because if you walk through this, it's saying, is U23 greater than U24? No, it's not, because 4 is greater than 2. So it's skipping this value of true and going to the value of false. But then the value of false is in itself another formula. So it knows to look for if U24, 4, is greater than U25, 5, which again is not, so it's going through the false term in that formula. And so it's spitting out a C. And so if we were to reassign these values and make this one 17, then it's going to return an A because it's going to, this first if statement is going to be correct. So it's going to go for the true statement there. And if B were the higher number, then it would say B because it's saying false to the first if statement and true to the second if statements. Does that part make sense, or are we good on that? Cool. And then the last thing in this, oh, it's not the last thing, what is this? So manual calculation is something if you're working in a really, really big workbook, so you're noticing that all of these things that I'm doing in Excel is instantly spitting out the correct answer, or like instantly calculate the answer. That's not always the case, and if you're working, it takes some processing power to do that. And with a workbook this size, it's really not a problem, because it's not that many formulas. But if you're working in some giant multi-page thing that's like 100 megabytes, then for Excel to recalculate every cell in the workbook every time you do something takes a few seconds, and that's aggravating. And so this is just some instructions for how to change that and make it so that you tell Excel when to recalculate instead of just doing it on the fly. So if you start working in larger workbooks, then this will tell you how to do that, and then you hit F9 every time that you want Excel to recalculate itself. And then the other thing, I mentioned the dollar signs before. So that's how you change a reference in Excel away from being a relative reference and into being an absolute reference. So when I was saying that it's looking for the cell 2 to the left of it instead of cell J25, if it's locked, it's going to look for cell J25 instead of the cell 2 to the left of it. So here's an example. So here I have, I moved things around here a bit, so those are wrong. So here I have a cell that's referencing just 8U23, the number is 1. And if I copy this down, then it's giving me a new value for each cell that I copy it to, just looking for the relative reference that one has to it. For this one over here, I've locked both the column and the row of it. And so when I bring this down, then it's, hang on. There we go. Then it's still giving me 1. And that's because this is still referencing this cell. So no matter where I paste this formula, then the formula will still reference the absolute location of the cell that it was originally referencing. And you could also lock either the row or the column. And it would only lock one of those things. So for like where the dollar sign is in the formula indicates what is locked. So if it's $A, $1, then both the row and the column is locked. If it's $A1, then the A is locked, but the 1 is not locked. And so an example of this would be if I have this table where I have income and tax rate, and I want to calculate people's tax by income and tax rate, and I multiply 10% by 30,000 and 3,000, then if I just go and I paste these values over here, then it's going to give me the wrong thing because these cells are referencing these cells. That's not what I want. But if I lock it, and what I want to do is on this A45 is 10%, I don't want to lock the column on it, I only want to lock the row on it, because I want it to slide over to 15%, but not down. So then I would lock the 45. And then on this one, since I want to lock column D, but not row 46, then I would put the $sign before the AD. And the way that you toggle these things is on a PC keyboard, it's F4, and on a Mac keyboard, it's Command T. And so I would use that formula and copy that over. And now so each one of these cells in this table is referencing the correct tax rate and income level.
What was the shortcut to do that?
On a PC keyboard, it's F4.
If you were to insert a new column or row into this worksheet, would it then, is it locking the specific column and row such that then the numbers would change, or is it locking that number that's in the column and row?
In that instance, it's relative. So if I were to put one in here, just insert it, then these are staying with the column that they're in. And so see, it's staying with the correct income, it's staying with
So
the correct
it
percentage.
just adjusted, did it just change the number of what?
No, it didn't. It stayed the same. Yeah, so it would not change the number. It would, yeah, so I guess it's both absolute and relative at the same time. But to answer your question, no, it would not change the number. Any other questions on this part? Okay. Alright, so the next thing we're going to talk about a bit is understanding errors. And so there's a few different types of errors in Excel, and here they all are. And this is kind of what causes them. We don't need to go through that though. But there's kind of a handy way to fix an error when you find it. You can kind of by sort of troubleshooting it. And so let's use this big hairy formula here. Don't worry about what VLOOKUP means again. I just kind of want to put a big complicated thing in here. And if I hit enter, then I'm getting an error. And since this is a really long formula, then just looking at it, I don't really know what's causing the error, so I need to figure it out a little bit. So I mentioned earlier that if you were to do manual calculation, then hitting F9 would recalculate everything on the page. The other thing that you can do with F9 is to resolve a certain part of the formula. And so on these keyboards, it's actually Fn F9 because it's a Mac keyboard running PC, which is annoying. But if I were to hit Fn F9, then that whole formula segment resolved to what its value was. So I'll undo that. So it's a long VLOOKUP formula here. If I hit Fn F9, then it resolves to 25 because that part of the formula comes in at 25. And for the purpose of troubleshooting this formula, what this tells me is that that part of the formula was the problem because it resolves to a thing that's not an error. So if I highlight the second part of the formula, you need to highlight an entire, like parentheses, two parentheses, so an entire function. And if I were to resolve that part of it, then that resolves to an error. So I know the error is somewhere in this half of the formula. And then so I can go in one level more and look up into this little VLOOKUP part of the formula at F9. And I see it resolves to a formula. But if I resolve this, then it doesn't. And so again, don't worry about this because you don't know what VLOOKUP is yet, but what it's telling me is that something about finding the phrase cashier in this table is giving me an error. And so if I look at the table, I can see that cashier is spelled wrong. And so if I fix that, then it will work. So that's probably a little bit more advanced than a lot of you need right now, but just understanding that you can resolve a part of a formula and then you can use that to then figure out what's going wrong with your formula is the main thing to get there.
Instead of using Fn F9, what's the alternative? Like what is that? Like what is that command?
So that command just means, well, like on a regular PC keyboard it's F9, or I guess the command or for what it does.
Yeah, like the longer way of doing it. That's the shortcut, right?
No, that is the way to do it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, usually it would just be F9 on a regular PC keyboard. I think it's command equals on Mac.
Okay.
Okay. So now we're going to start talking about some of the more advanced functions. And these are kind of like, there's 6 to 8 functions that all of like the data or that 90% of the data analysis and summary stuff that you do in Excel happens with. And the kind of main summary ones are countif, countifs, sumifs, average if, and average ifs. And so it's kind of taking the base descriptive functions that we talked about earlier, like count, sum, product, those things, and combining it with an if. And so here's the data for each state, who the 2012 election went to, what their population is, and what their square mileage is. And so we're going to use this to talk about what some of these things do. So if I want to know how many states voted for Barack Obama in the 2012 election, I can do that with count if. So I'm putting a condition, not saying count it, but put an if condition on it. So count if, so it's telling me to give it a range, is the first term it asks for, and then a criteria. So the range, I highlight this set of Obamas and Romneys, and then I hit comma to separate the terms. And then for criteria, in quotes, because it's a text value, I put in Obama. And I close the parentheses, and it says 27. And so if I had done Romney instead of Obama, it would be about 23. And then if I want to do a sum if, so let's say that I want to know how many states, or how many people live in a state that voted for Barack Obama, then I can do sum if. And so again, I give it a range, these states. I give it a condition, I say Obama. And then I give it a sum range. So the range of cells that I want it to sum, where that condition is satisfied. Then I go and highlight this population field. And so this is like, what, 193 million or something like that? 196. And so, because it's, the size of these two ranges need to be the same. But so what it's doing is it's identifying the cells in column J where the condition that I gave it are satisfied. And then it's summing the cells in column K that correspond to the cells in column J that satisfy that condition. Does that make sense? Cool. And then average if is the same thing. So if we wanted to, instead of say what's the total population of these states, what's the average population of these states, then it would just be average if instead of sum if, and it would give me this number because it's the average. And then you can also put more than one qualifier on this data. So if I want to know, if I want to do a count if, a count ifs. So if there's more than one if, then you do ifs instead of if. And so if I want to know the ones that voted for Romney, and then I put in the second one, and I'll say states that are called Alabama. So there's only going to be one, because there's only one row, or there's only one set of cells in these two ranges that satisfy both voting for Romney and being called Alabama. Now, if you wanted to do a sum ifs, you want to find a sum of those things, then you just replace the count ifs with a sum if, and add a sum range. And the difference between a sum if and a sum ifs is that the sum range, the range of cells that you're summing, comes first in the formula instead of last in the formula. So I put this over here first, and then put some conditions on it. So it's, in this case, just giving you the population of Alabama. I put some more examples over here if you guys want to look through them later. I realized that I kind of messed up and that I only put one range of text data in here, because if you're doing this with numeric data, like if your condition is on a range of numeric data, then it's a little trickier to do. So like if I, for example, I wanted to know the population of states that voted for Romney and are bigger than 100,000 square miles, then I would do sum ifs, so population is my sum range. My first qualifier is voted for Romney, so the range of the president and then Romney. And then I would do the second range would be square miles. And I can't just type in 100,000 because I'm not looking for states that are 100,000 square miles. I'm looking for them that are bigger than 100 square miles. But Excel won't let me just type in greater than 100,000. That doesn't work. talk about concatenation soon. And then that will make it work. And this will make a little bit more sense when we talk about concatenation. But if you want to use a countifs or a sumifs with numeric data as a qualifier, then you need to do this like range thing, or greater than sign in quotes, and the number.
Can I ask a really basic, probably stupid question?
Of course.
How are you highlighting things
Yes.
without just dragging it down?
So if you hold down Control,
Yeah.
then you will zoom to the edge of whatever range of data you're going in. So if your pointer is on a blank cell and you hold down Control and hit left, then it will go to the first populated cell. And I really like that
Oh,
better
Mac.
if you tried it. Oh yeah,
Yes,
it's
you're right.
Command on a Mac. Sorry.
I was like, what?
And then if you're on a populated cell and you do it, then it will go to the end of that range. So I can now like zoom around like this. And now if I hold Shift while I do that as well, then it's going to highlight everything between where I started and where I went to. So what I was doing before was I was starting at this first list of data, holding down Control Shift and pressing down, and it's going to highlight everything from where I started to the last cell of that data range.
Thank you.
Is it generally the case that anytime it's Control or PC, it's Command on the Mac?
I think usually, yeah, it is. It really, really
I
is.
should really talk to each other.
Cool. Any other questions on count, sum, or average if? Okay. So the next big type of summary function is sum product, which is kind of similar, where instead of, well, I guess it'd be kind of similar. Instead of combining a sum and an if, you're combining a sum and a product. So for example, here's let's say that this is like employee wage data. So we've got a bunch of employees, how many hours they worked, their dollar per hour, and how many weeks per hour they worked. So if we want to know how much money all of these people made per year, one way of doing it would be to multiply hours per week by dollars per hour by weeks per year for each of the employees, and then adding that up. But you can imagine that if you're working in a bigger data set, that would be a pain in the ass. So instead, there's the sum product. So if we take that and we highlight this one range, we hit comma, we highlight the second range, hit comma, we highlight the third range, close it and enter it, then it gives us the same number. So it's effectively doing that same thing. So if we look at these three ranges here, what it's doing is when it says sum product, it's kind of more like a product sum. It's taking the product of these three cells, the product of these three cells, and so forth, and then summing those together. And then, so that's kind of the base sum product, and then it gets a little more complicated from there. So there's not really a sum product if, the same way there's like a sum if, but you can make one. So for example, if we want to do the same thing, we only want to look at the money that the cashiers made. One way to do it would be to say, is there a position a cashier? So equals position equals cashier. And then we call it, like, we put that then in a parentheses and +1. And that's, so you guys remember like PEMDAC from like 4th grade or whatever, like parentheses, whatever that thing is, multiply, divide, add, subtract. Yeah, PEMDAC, that's the one. Excel does the same thing, so if I want to do this one, then it's like looking inside the parentheses first, so I'm solving that logical thing +0, then it's giving me a 0, ignore the $sign. And if I bring that down, then it's giving me so it's only telling me the ones that are cashiers, so then I can do a sum product with this, for example, that would kind of include the cashiers. And so for everyone that's not a cashier, it's multiplying by 0, so it's not included in there, so it's only giving me the annual salary for the cashiers. So that's kind of the long way to do that. But the short way is to embed that in a formula the same way that we embedded the first one in the sum product formula. And so the way that you do that is we've got our original sum product, just adding up these three things. And then kind of so if we included this range here just of zeros and ones, then it would incorporate that and just give us the cashier. So instead we're not going to use this column, we're going to create our own range of zeros and ones within this formula. by saying within parentheses whether those positions equal cashier, and then so that's going to give us a true and false range. And so we're going to add 0, the way we talked about earlier, to convert a true statement to a number. And then that's going to give it the same result. So what this is effectively doing, this like green range equals cashier in parentheses plus 0, is it's creating a range of binary variables. So if we resolve this part of the function or formula bar, then we can see that range of 1s and 0s. So if I just did the same like F9 thing to like solve that part of the formula. So you can see the actual range that got created out of that formula. And so then that's being multiplied by these, and so it's giving us the formula we're looking for. Is that confusing, clear? Questions?
I'm gonna go back and just read this.
Right, yeah. So again, how I started out by saying that my goal for this is not for you all to leave knowing how to use Excel, it's to leave knowing what Excel can do. So this is the stuff that Excel can do, and then when you need to do it, go back and read this page. Okay. So the one thing, actually, despite having just said that, this is the one thing that each of you should leave here knowing how to do. Because a pivot table is like the easiest thing that you can do that can do the most for you. So here's a bunch of data about, this is United Kingdom like capacity for different like power plants, because I was using this data last year. And I want, so there's a whole bunch down there, it goes down to like 393, and I just want to like, know some basic stuff, like how much wind capacity is there, or like how much capacity was installed in whatever year. So what I'll do is I'll go to Insert Pivot Table, and I'll select the range that I want to use, and it's already done for me because I can tell where my cursor was when I clicked it. And I'm going to put it in an existing worksheet instead of a new worksheet, so stick it over here.
I have a really dumb question, but do you know where the insert pivot table is on the Mac version?
Let's see. It is in the data ribbon.
Oh. I was looking on the table ribbon.
Yeah, no, it's, sorry, I apologize for Microsoft on this. Okay, so what that did, bring it to the table, just create this like little empty box. But then I have this little dialog thing over here that I can use. So if I take, so let's say that I want to know how much capacity there has been by country in the UK. So I'll take location, which is the name of that, that first column, and I'm going to drag it into rows. And so now I have rows for each of those countries. And now I want the sum of the capacity for each of those countries. So I'm going to take the capacity row, and I'm going to drag it into values. And so now I have the sum of the capacity column for each unique value in the location column. And so if I want to make that more complicated, I can say, well, I really want to know how much capacity there is of each fuel in each country. So I can take the fuel row and drag that into column. And so now I have by country and by column how much capacity there's been. And I can make this more confusing. I can put columns as a secondary row. So now I've got like countries and fuel. I can put installation year in a column, so now I'm going all the way out for each thing that there is. So let's put that back in its box and then back to countries and fuels. And the other thing that I can do is by default it's showing me the sum of this value, but it doesn't need to. If I click on this little arrow here and I go to value field settings, and I go and say I want to know the number of planes instead of the sum of their capacity, and I can just say count. And so now it's giving me the count. Or if I say I actually want to know the average, then I can go do the average, and so it's giving me the average size of those plants. So this is the thing that you guys should all really know.
Can you do it on the Mac one right quick also? Can you do the,
You should.
just like the initial step
Yeah.
after you press the pivot table button?
Oh yeah, sure. So I'm not sure, it might look a little bit different on here, so tell me if it does. But go to data pivot table, and so does it look something like this?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, so it's going to be in, I think it's going to be data, no?
No, mine does.
Is it an automatic pivot table or a manual pivot
You
table?
go to
Ooh,
So the
I
data?
don't know. Let's see.
It's also
I
created
guess
in
the
a
manual, I
different
did
sheet.
this thing. So
Okay. Yeah, so do manual table.
Manual.
Okay.
And then, so for the location, you're gonna highlight that entire data table from company name down to the very bottom right thing, everything in that value. And you can use the control button.
And now, so how do I do command?
Command and hold down and press down.
And then,
Yeah.
ah,
Wait a minute, what's happening? Why is this taking?
Okay, so start at company name, just click on that and hold command and hit right and down. Okay, so now you've selected all of that stuff. Oh no, hang on. I guess.
Command shift?
Oh yeah, sorry, command shift, my bad.
okay.
So now once you have a pivot table, like if I want to take your pivot table and